Hello and bienvenidos to MMA Fighting's Bellator 220 and UFC for Lauderdale preview show. My name is Danny Segura and I'll be hosting this show today. And joining me on the screen next to me is MMA Fighting's Jose Youngs, who will be helping me break down all the action from both cards. This is a little bit of a hybrid show, so we'll be taking a look at all the storylines from both events going on this weekend. So, Jose, first of all, let's start off with Bellator. They're both going down on Saturday. But let's start off with Bellator. Pretty big fight going on there, a title fight, in fact. John Fitch is going to be challenging Rory MacDonald as part of the welterweight Grand Prix quarterfinals, if I'm not mistaken, still in the first round.
Correct.
This is a main event bout, pretty big welterweight contest. First of all, let's talk about John Fitch's longevity. The man is almost 41 years old. I believe when he challenged for a UFC title, I was like a freshman in high school. You know, now all of a sudden, I'm a tax-paying adult, and here he is still challenging for a belt. How remarkable is his longevity in the sport? I mean, he's been a contender in every single promotion that he's been in.
It's interesting given the fact that there was a stretch in time where a lot of people did write him off, similar to Diego Sanchez, where he had a couple losses, especially that Husamal Palhares loss in World Series of Fighting, his failed drug test for testosterone and all this stuff. So I think it's very fascinating given where his career was. But if you had asked me like 10 years ago that John Fitch would have a long career, it really wouldn't surprise me. None of his fights, he really took a lot of damage. He was more of a grinder. He would come out relatively unscathed. So it shouldn't interest me, but given where his career was only a few years ago, it is a little surprising.
Yeah. And what would it mean to his legacy? We feel like, he's been around for so long. He's had so many fights that sort of his legacy is already written and he is who he is. But what would it mean for him to capture the Bellator world title? Because he is fighting Rory MacDonald, which is, he's a top, fighter in the world. He had a win over the champion not so long ago in the UFC. So what would it mean to his career to get that belt?
Take the title out of the equation. A win for John Fitch over Rory MacDonald is just phenomenal for his legacy. I mean, if Rory MacDonald comes in locked in, unlike what he did against Gegard Mousasi, I think he could be one of, if not the best welterweights in the world. And if John Fitch not only dethrones him from the top of the welterweight division, moves on the welterweight Grand Prix, that will just elevate his career as kind of one of the unsung best fighters of all time at welterweight. I mean, he's fought BJ Penn, George St. Pierre. Yes, he came up short against Johnny Hendricks. He's beat the Brian Fosters, but he's fought in a who's who at welterweight, and a win for him just kind of creeps him up that list of greatest welterweights of all time.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, if you just look at his resume and how long he's been in the sport, a win over Rory MacDonald and becoming the Bellator champion, I don't think he becomes automatically the greatest. I think we know who that is. It's probably between, GSP, maybe throw in there Matt Hughes, but you could easily say he's a top 10 welterweight, in the world, one of the greatest ever, right?
For sure, 100%. I mean, I don't know if I put him top 5, but if he wins if he wins the whole tournament, he gets pretty darn close. And like he was on the MMA Hour with you guys, he said he might want to jump up to challenge for a middleweight title. If he wins this tournament, wins the middleweight title, I mean, we have to start talking about John Fitch as one of the greatest fighters of all time. But that's farther down the road. He has to get past Rory MacDonald first.
Yeah. Now, people are saying, this is probably one of the toughest fights, if not the toughest fight in the tournament. And I've seen some talk that, whoever wins this, not really a given, given that there's other, very great competitors in the tournament. But it seems like whoever wins this is probably going to win the welterweight Grand Prix. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's still up for grabs?
I think this is obviously the toughest fight. Anytime you face a reigning champion in a tournament, it has to be the toughest fight. I mean, like I said, Rory could be the best welterweight on planet Earth. I mean, he has a win over Tyron Woodley. Yes, his last loss, you're only as good as your last performance, and his last performance was probably the worst of his career, but he told our site, he just wasn't locked in. He didn't have the passion, he didn't have the drive, and he feels that this time. So a focused Rory MacDonald, in my opinion, is one of the top 2 welterweights on planet Earth. I don't know if it's guaranteed they win. I mean, you do have Lima and MVP on the other side. And I mean, Neiman Gracie beating Ed Ruth. I mean, I didn't see that coming. I thought Ed Ruth was a dark horse, if not one of the favorites to win. And Neiman Gracie just dominated him all over the board. So I don't think it's guaranteed they win, but I think I would call them the favorite.
Yeah. Speaking of Neiman, the winner here will be taking Neiman Gracie in June at Bellator 222. So we'll see how that plays out. But let's talk a little bit more about Rory. You just mentioned, his last performance wasn't the greatest. And when he went on to Bellator, when he won the title, Tyron Woodley was also champion in the UFC, and he does have a win over Tyron Woodley. So there was a lot of talk between, what promotion has the best welterweight. I feel like a lot of that has dwindled away a little bit, given Rory MacDonald's loss against Gegard. It definitely wasn't a good one, and also Tyron Woodley loss, which doesn't help him as well. Do you have that same sentiment that the talks of Rory MacDonald being one of the greatest welterweights right now is kind of dwindling away?
It's for sure dwindling, just because, like I said, you're only as good as your last performance, and people are going to point to that as like, well, like he looked like he just didn't belong in the cage against Gegard Mousasi. But I do think Rory MacDonald is a top 5 welterweight, top 3. Tyron's obviously up there. Kamaru Usman is obviously up there. He's the champion now. You have Colby Covington. Santiago Ponzinibbio is still, no one's talking about him. I mean, Rory MacDonald's fighting John Fitch, who's already fought in a who's who. MVP, you got Lima. I mean, I would still put Rory MacDonald in the top 5, top 3, but I do agree with you that the talks of who has the best welterweight has severely fallen off in the last few months.
Yeah, for sure. So with that being said, how much do you think a loss would hurt his stock? Because, we know the damage that he's, taken throughout his career. Yes, he is the Bellator welterweight champion, but, we still have that image of him fighting Gegard Mousasi and kind of getting beat up, if I'm being honest. How much would a loss, hurt his career and his stock here?
I think it really depends on how he would lose. I mean, if he just goes out there and lays an egg and has another performance like he did against Gegard, I think that will severely damage his legacy and his momentum in the eyes of the fan. Obviously, he would lose his championship in the process too, so that would be a huge blow. He would have 2 losses. I mean, even the Lima fight, if we're honest, it wasn't like he didn't break Lima. That was a really competitive fight.
Yeah.
So his last few losses, he's not blowing people away. And even going back to his last UFC fight against Wonderboy, that was a very technical fight. It wasn't the most exciting, but like I don't know anyone that's arguing that he won that fight. Like Wonderboy clearly won, and then you have that war against Robbie Lawler, which a lot of people call the greatest title fight ever. I don't know if John Fitch is the fighter that's going to damage Rory MacDonald. I mean, I think he went 10 years between stoppage wins, and I think 20 of his 30 wins have been by decision. And it's not like he's just mauling people. He's just suffocating them. He's drowning them. So I don't know if John Fitch is the guy that will do that to Rory, but yeah, it's tough. A loss would severely damage his credibility as one of the top welterweights in the world for sure.
Yeah, I would have to agree, and I think there's not much talk about that. It's all about what's next. But I mean, if Rory does take a loss here, I mean, it could really redefine his career and his legacy. Obviously, there's still room for him to right that wrong if he does lose, but nonetheless, I think it will still hurt his career quite a lot. Let's move on to the co-main event of that card. It is a women's flyweight bout. Ilima-lei Macfarlane would be taking on Vida Arteaga. First of all, this is a matchup that's sort of been flying under the radar, given probably Vida's status is not a Valerie Letourneau. She doesn't have this big name or a big background, and she hasn't really been exposed to the MMA fans as much as other contenders. What's the storyline in this? Because I was looking at the matchup, and yes, it's a title defense. Yes, Ilima is a face of Bellator. But what's the storyline going into this matchup?
I mean, the story is Ilima's. She's undefeated champion. She's coming off submission win over Valerie Letourneau. Casey and Esther were there in Hawaii when she won, and I mean, they couldn't stop talking about that just not just that fight, but that whole event. They said it was up there with when Conor won in Dublin and just the electricity in the arena. So going off of that, she's 9-0. I think she has like 3 or 4 submission wins in a row. She's the reigning champion. She's clearly one of the faces of the entire promotion. And then on the flip side, Veita's only 2 losses are by split decision. So one judge favors her. She's undefeated too. So, but I get why people are saying like Ilima should just run through her. I personally thought Valerie Letourneau would be her hardest test, and she didn't really break a sweat in there. She came out with another submission win. She's in the co-main event slot, so if she goes 10-0 with another submission win, we're talking about her as being one of the best female. I mean, I already think she's one of the best female fighters in the world, if obviously in that division. But if she continues her unbeaten streak, another submission win over another very credible opponent, we're talking about her as being just one of the best fighters in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think this fight obviously is going to be, if she does get past Vida, it's going to be, a win in her record, obviously another title defense, and, she's still going to be undefeated. And I think Bellator did a great job at putting her on this card because, as I said, Vida is not, Valerie Letourneau is not a fighter that has a big name yet. So, it's good that she's getting a little bit of that shine from that main event bout because, it is a big fight, the main event in Bellator's history. So Bellator did a great job with that fight. Any other fights you want to talk about this card?
Oh, Benson Henderson's fighting on this card, for another former UFC champion. You got Phil Davis versus Liam McGarry, a rematch. I mean, Phil Davis and Liam McGarry are both former Bellator champions. Phil Davis, obviously, another UFC veteran. Liam McGarry actually has that submission win over Tito Ortiz. So I think that's flying under the radar as just a good. I don't know how much it does for the title implications, considering they're both coming off not the best performances. But I love that scrap. I always enjoy watching Benson Henderson fight. His last win was super impressive. I mean, just that axe kick to his downed opponent that Esther caught is just like burned in my mind. And say what you want for his suspect decision on comic book characters that he enjoys reading, but I always tune in for when Benson Henderson fights.
Yeah, and he described his Bellator run a while ago in the MMA, I believe, speaking with Eric Hawani, as anticlimactic. But it seems that he's getting some momentum and things are kind of shifting his way. Would you agree? I mean, 2-fight win streak.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know how healthy he was in his initial few fights in Bellator. He was kind of taking these fights that they were fights you couldn't turn down. It was title fights. It was big name opponents. I don't believe he was 100% healthy going into there. I feel like they gave him, I don't want to call them lesser opponents, but not non-title fights. Maybe some, not the Pitbull brothers. He might have taken some time off to heal, but they were fights he had to take, and he came up short. But if he's 100%, and I would love to see him rematch Chandler if they're both 100% for sure.
By the way, I forgot to ask you this about Fitch and Rory, but what's your prediction on that fight?
Oh, I gotta go with Rory. I think he's gonna rely on the jab. I don't think Fitch obviously doesn't have the knockout power that a Robbie Lawler has. That's really, everyone keeps saying, like, are you gonna go for the nose? Rory MacDonald's nose has that history of being really like fragile, and he breaks it and he kind of falls apart. I don't think John Fitch is that type of fighter that has the power that's going to affect him in that way. I think Rory is really going to rely on that stiff jab and stuff the takedowns, and I'm going to say Rory by decision. I think it's going to go all the rounds.
Yeah, Fitch is definitely a tough customer and tough to get out of the fight. So I think it's definitely going to decision, but I'm actually leaning a little bit towards John Fitch. Maybe I still have that picture of Gegard Mousasi, defeating Rory MacDonald, but I don't know. I have a feeling John Fitch is going to pull this one off, but we'll see. Definitely a good fight. All right, well, let's transition now to UFC Fort Lauderdale. It's actually UFC Sunrise. Quick little fact, I actually, before I moved to New York City, where my parents live is just, probably like 100 feet from the BB&T Center. And that's in Sunrise. Not really technically for Lauderdale, but I guess that's what they're rolling with, so we'll go with that. All right, in the main event of that card, you'll have Jacare Souza taking on Jack Hermansson. It was originally scheduled to be Jacare Souza versus Yoel Romero too, but obviously, plans changed. First of all, how excited about this matchup? Because I think, Jack Hermansson, yes, he did get a win over David Branch last month. It was pretty impressive, but Yoel Romero, just being a former title challenger, it felt like that matchup carried a little bit more weight.
I mean, I agree with our colleague Sean Al-Shadi when he says a win over Yoel Romero is the most impressive thing you can do in the middleweight division. I mean, if Jacare had beaten Yoel Romero, and whether it was submission, decision, TKO, whatever, that's a title shot, guaranteed. I mean, anyone that beats Yoel Romero should just stick a rocket on him and shoot him up the ranks, because that, you survived a wood chipper. A win over Jack Hermansson, obviously, Jacare is saying he's already been guaranteed a title shot if he wins. So we have to wonder if we can take the UFC at their word. But it's a little disappointing that we're not going to get that rematch between Jacare and Romero.
Yeah, I was definitely looking forward to that one. But, as you just alluded, Dana White is out there saying, and Jacare is out there saying that Dana White told him that if he gets a win here, he's automatically going to get a title shot. I don't know if the UFC has a great track record of keeping their promises. How confident are you that if Jacare Souza gets past Jacare Hermansson, he'll be getting a title shot?
I really do think it has to do with how he wins. I mean, if he just goes out there and just mauls him like he did against Derek Brunson or like Tim Boesch and just goes out there and puts him away real fast, then I feel like you have to give it to him. I mean, what else does he have to do? He's the best fighter that hasn't fought for a championship in that division. He's knocked out Chris Weidman. He's the only people he's really lost to is Romero. And the first time they fought, it was a very close fight. It was a split decision. Yeah. A lot of people think he won. And then he lost to the champion, Robert Whittaker, and then he lost to Kelvin Gastelum. So nothing to really hang your head down on who you came up short against. But Jack Hermansson's obviously not in the top 10. Jacare was a little annoyed by that, but I don't know, like this interim title fight that happened between Izzy and Kelvin kind of threw a wrench in everything. If there was no interim belt and Robert Whittaker was just the champion or Israel Adesanya was just the champion, then we'd have a clear picture. But with Israel Adesanya saying he doesn't want to rush back into a fight with Robert Whittaker, Jacare Souza might have to wait around a while longer for that title shot.
Yeah, I personally, not too confident that he'll get the next shot. I mean, you keep in mind,
absolutely not.
I mean, Romero's still out there. Because we still have that unification bout pending. Obviously, that's most likely going to go down between Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. If Adesanya wins, I think for Jacare, that's good news because I think there's some interest in that matchup, and they've gone back and forth before in the past. So I think that'll be good for him. But say Robert Whittaker wins, I don't know if people are dying to see that rematch. And there's still Paulo Costa out there. We'll see what happens with him and USADA since he's being investigated. Chris Weidman still has a big name, so who knows what happens in that division. But, hopefully the UFC does the right thing and gives him a title shot, eventually. I think, in my opinion, Jacare is probably the best fighter in the UFC to have never fought for a title. I don't know who else can give him a run for that. I think Yoel Romero was up there for a while.
I would have to agree.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Jack Hermansson. As I said, last month he got a super impressive win over David Branch, submission win, which that's not an easy thing to do, submit a Renzo black belt. What's in it for him? I mean, you put two wins back to back in quick succession. How far will this put him in the UFC rankings?
It's going to catapult him. I mean, a win over Romero is the most impressive thing you can do, I think, in the middleweight division at the moment. But taking a fight on short notice against a guy like Jacare Souza and winning, especially if he finishes him, Jack Hermansson is automatically a title contender. I mean, he's very good. He's a very likable individual. I don't want to say he's the best on interviews. There might be like a little language thing, or he might not know some phrases in English, but he's a very charismatic guy. I mean, he's always smiling. He cares so much about the rankings. I mean, I interviewed him in Milwaukee, and the whole time he's like, I just want to get in the top 15. I just want to get in the top 15. Beats David Branch. He's like, I want top 10. I want top 10. So very likable guy, very charismatic, and a win over Jacare will just catapult him up. I think he's going to be in the real close to the top 5, if not in the top 5 if he wins.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. He could have, if he gets past Jacare, he could be 1 or 2 more wins from getting a title shot. So we'll see how that plays out. Official prediction for that bout.
I'm going to go Jacare. I mean, we've seen like against Tim Boesch, against the Derek Brunsons, against the Chris Camozis, when Jacare has these fights that he doesn't believe he just takes the fights because he believes he has something down the road that he's promised. He just comes out there with murderous intent and just massacres these people. I mean, he puts them away in devastating fashion. So I think that's going to happen again. I'll say Jacare inside 2 rounds, just because you're going to see a real angry and real aggressive Jacare taking a fight and cutting weight when he doesn't think he should even have to.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I think I'm leaning towards Jacare in that one. All right, let's talk about the co-main event. Greg Hardy will be taking on Dmitry Smolyakov. I don't know if I butchered his name. Sorry if I did. I'm just going to ask it plainly. Why is Greg Hardy in this co-main event?
It's the name. That's all I can. It's just the name. He's a former NFL Pro Bowler, played on the Cowboys, played on the Panthers, and he has the track record with his criminal background. I don't want to call it I don't want to throw labels on him or anything, but he does have the history that if you don't know he's an MMA fighter, you hear Greg Hardy, what's the first thing you're going to think of if you know who he is? It's his history with the domestic violence and everything. So it's clearly just the name. I mean, you saw in his last fight, he was the co-main event for TJ Dillashaw and Henry Cejudo, and I truly believe from the co-main event to the main event on that card is the biggest gap in terms of talent we've ever seen inside the octagon. I mean, Greg Hardy gassed out in 60 seconds and then got a DQ loss. To say there was no technique in that fight would be a gross understatement. He's clearly very raw. Obviously has power because before that he was just knocking people out in 60 seconds. So it's obviously just the name. Because there's no other reason for being in the co-main event after his last performance.
Yeah, I was there for that performance. It was here in Brooklyn. It was quite a show, I got to say. But I guess let me push back a little bit on that. Maybe is my ignorance to American sports or American football, because I don't really tune in. By the way, are you an American football fan? Do you follow the sport?
Huge.
Okay. Well, I don't really know much about it. The first time I heard about Greg Hardy was when he came over to the UFC and obviously the controversy surrounding that. But, I look at, for example, his Twitter. He's only got about, I think, like 20,000 followers, and on Instagram maybe like 35 or something like that. Is he a big name? Is he that popular? Because maybe it's just me, but, I don't really, hear too much headlines or too much, I guess, anticipation for him in this fight in the co-main event. It's not like a Brock Lesnar.
Well, actually, I think he deleted his Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't there a few days ago. If he brought it back, I'm not sure. But Greg Hardy, when he was in the NFL, was a very disruptive player. He wasn't the best, but he was one of those. He was like a character. I mean, he would paint his face. Like, instead of just under the eyes or anything, he would have like streaks across his face. He would like yell into the mic. He was a very aggressive character on the field, and he was one of those guys that he was always like trash talking his opponents and everything. He's an imposing figure. He's very big, and whether the incident happened or not, I don't know. I've never really like looked into the legal matters of it. It was a very high profile case in terms of what they said happened. Like, if that happened, it's horrifying and shocking. Like, if you read that, how is he being able to play football, let alone step into the octagon? So it was a very shocking turn of events. I mean, and then when the Cowboys signed him after it happened, the Cowboys got a lot of heat, and they're obviously the most, outside of the Patriots, obviously, I'd say the Cowboys are the most famous football team in the world.
Patriots? Who's that? I'm just kidding. I'm trolling.
Right. So the Cowboys are obviously, quote unquote, America's team. And for the Cowboys to sign him after this happens just kind of added fuel to the fire. And then no other team would touch him, really. I mean, it's not like he was bad, too. He was a good football player. He had double-digit sacks a few times, Pro Bowler. So wasn't the best, but he was one of the more memorable characters on the NFL field.
Well, good to know. Let me ask you this. We've talked about a while back, for example, Sage Northcutt, a guy still very much in development, being catapulted to, co-main event bouts and big cards as well. And, a lot of people express how, that's a mistake. Usually those guys, you want to kind of, put them in the prelims and bury them a little bit just so they can get, warmed up to the idea of being under the bright lights and all that. Bellator does a great job at that with their prospects. Is the UFC making a mistake by putting Greg Hardy in this co-main event bout? Because as you said, his UFC debut didn't go as planned. He only has, I think, 4 professional fights, and here he is fighting in a co-main event card. The placement of the card might be a little suspect. Obviously, it's the opponent isn't suspect. I mean, Sage Northcutt was getting these, like he had a few fights in there, like the Cody Pfister fight really sticks out to me, where he wasn't facing the best fighters in the world, and then all of a sudden he fought Mickey Gall, who was like a legitimate brown belt on the ground, and it really exposed him. But his opponent is already 0-2, I believe, in the UFC. I mean, he was cut, and now they're bringing him back to fight Greg Hardy. So the placement might be suspect. It's ESPN Plus, too, so I don't know how many people really tune in. It's not like he's on a big network or a pay-per-view. So being in the co-main event slot is a little odd to me, especially because it's not like he had a good performance. He didn't even win. And he's fighting a guy who's 0-2. So just take out the history. If you don't know who these two guys are and you just look at it on paper, it's real weird, especially because we have some real good fights on the rest of the card. But
People that don't watch the UFC, maybe they want to buy ESPN Plus to watch Greg Hardy fight. Who knows?
Yeah. This is a weird card because it doesn't feel all that big, but when you actually look at the rundown, you go, oh, this name's in there. There's actually some pretty interesting bouts. Any fights you want to highlight, any other than the main and co-main?
I mean, people will kill me in the comment section if I don't talk about Mike Perry, me specifically. Yes. He's fighting Cowboy Oliveira. I love that fight. People were asking me like, "Oh, which fight card would you watch?" I really liked how on the A side, this past A side chat with Sean and Mark, someone says which event is going to be on the big TV and which one are you going to put on the small TV in your room? I was like, I kind of like that phrasing. I'm obviously going to watch the title fights in Bellator, but I have to watch Cowboy Oliveira and Mike Perry. That is a violent scrap. That has fight of the night written all over it. I mean, Alex Oliveira has wins over like the Carlos Condits. He's come up. His fight against Yancy Medeiros was just like anarchy in the octagon. I mean, both guys were messed up after that fight. And then Mike Perry, always exciting to watch. He's obviously one of the more interesting characters in the all of MMA, not just the UFC, but doesn't have boring fights. I'm excited for that stare down. I'm excited for that scrap. And then obviously you got Glover Teixeira on that card. You got John Lineker's coming back. Guy has nukes on the end of his hands. Yeah, John Lineker, and I believe Corey Sandhagen is his. Yep. I hope I'm pronouncing that last name. Yeah, a lot of people compare Sandhagen to Dominic Cruz. It's like another iteration, and he said like I kind of patterned my style of fighting off of him. And Dominic Cruz versus John Lineker was a fight I always wanted to see, and they were supposed to fight before Cruz got hurt most recently. So if this is the next big thing, like I'm game. I mean, I always want to watch John Lineker fight, and I always like watching Dominic Cruz fight. So if Corey Sandhagen is the next iteration of Cruz, and this is the next best thing, sign me up all day.
Yeah, definitely a good card. So safe to say you're gonna be watching the UFC one and have the Bellator on the side. What card excites you the most this weekend?
I have to watch. I mean, I'm gonna watch title fights regardless. I mean, title fights obviously have more meaning. I'm always down to watch Rory. I'm gonna watch Benson. But I'll say I'll flip back and forth. I'll do the cop out because I don't think either card is significantly better than the other. But there are fights that just might mean more to the division that I'm gonna have to pay attention to.
Yeah. I would say this. I think UFC for Lauderdale has a better card overall. Like, it goes pretty deep. I mean, Andrei Arlovsky's on there, Angela Hill, Ben Saunders. You can just keep going. Whereas
Jim Miller, we have 32 fights.
Jim Miller as well, yep. But I would say the best fight is on the Bellator card. I'm really looking forward to that Rory MacDonald versus John Fitch fight. Not only is it a title fight, but it's two pretty good welterweights going at it. So definitely looking forward to that. All right, Jose. Well, thank you so much for joining me in this preview show. You can follow him at Jose Youngs. You can follow me at Danny Segura TV. You can follow MMA Fighting at MMA Fighting to keep up with all the news and everything going on this weekend with the fights. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hasta pronto.